Speaking of Biden and the actions he's made recently, you recently made a great point that while President Biden and the Democratic establishment may be drifting left economically when it comes to their spending, we see this with the stimulus and infrastructure proposals. Concurrently happening to this is this massive rise in inequality. And this is, of course, further consolidated wealth at the top. They had to do something about this disintegrating social contract, you said, which would explain the heavier than expected stimulus programs and the infrastructure package from the Biden administration thus far. But what should Biden actually do to address and mitigate the inequality at a foundational level rather than just merely inflating the benefits for the lower classes, essentially, to obfuscate from the upwards transfer of wealth and assets?
Well, I think we have a problem. There's at least sort of two stages as I could answer this question. And I don't believe at this point that Mr. Biden is going to enter either of these two stages or go any of this distance I'm about to describe. So it's not my expectation, and I'll begin by telling you why. The comparison that Mr. Biden's followers and supporters like to make is the comparison between Mr. Biden and Franklin Roosevelt the last time capitalism crashed on this scale, which was the 1930s. But there's a fundamental difference. Mr. Roosevelt is like Mr. Biden in the sense that both were centrist Democrats when they ran for office in most of their political lives. But what changed was when Mr. Roosevelt won the election in 1932 and became the president, he confronted an economic crisis even worse than the one that Mr. Biden has inherited. But that's not the crucial difference. The crucial difference was that within a couple of years of the great crash of 1929, a historical shift to the left in the United States got underway. We had, and this is really important for people to understand, the most massive movement to organize workers into unions we've ever seen in the United States. We've never had anything like it before. We've never had anything like it since. Millions and millions of Americans quickly joined the CIO unions. These were people who had never been in a union before, whose parents had never been in a union before, but who joined the union out of a sense that their lives, their well-being, their survival in the Great Depression depended on it. And working very closely with the CIO were two socialist parties and a communist party that were at their peak of social influence, counting tens of thousands of activist members, closely allied with and often the leading militants in the unionization drive of the CIO. These social forces, mobilized in this very effective way, went to Mr. Roosevelt and basically gave him an ultimatum. If you do what we want you to do to help people through this depression, we will make you the president because we have the votes to do it. And if you don't, you won't become the next dog catcher in town because we'll vote against it. That, it was put as bluntly as that behind closed doors. In the public version, the same thing was said. So Mr. Roosevelt, who was an astute politician, understood clearly that this was no bluff. And to make a long story short, he accommodated. He created Social Security. We'd never had that before. He created the federal unemployment compensation system. We never had that before. He passed the first minimum wage in American history. We'd never had that before. And he hired 15 million people for public federal government jobs. I mean, unbelievable, way beyond anything Mr. Biden has even thought about, let alone proposed. Well, what's the difference? Mr. Biden doesn't have a massive upswing from the left. The union movement is at a historic low, and the socialist and communist parties barely exist with minimal social influence. So Mr. Biden doesn't have something that Mr. Roosevelt had to contend with. So I don't expect Mr. Biden, which is what I began with, to even go as far as Roosevelt was forced to go. But there's a further point, and that I think for an audience like yours is more relevant. Even if Mr. Biden were to go as far as Roosevelt, that doesn't solve the problem either. The reason is simple. Mr. Roosevelt never challenged, nor did the New Deal, never challenged the basic organization of factories, offices, and stores. In short, did not challenge the organization of capitalist enterprises. In those enterprises, a tiny group of people at the top of each of them, whether it's the owner of the business or the family that runs it, or in the corporate form, which is now dominant, the board of directors at the top, usually a group of 10 to 20 people, they make all the decisions. They decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, all of it. And most important, they decide what to do with whatever net revenue the enterprise generates. All of the employees make that possible, and they are systematically excluded from all decisions. Therefore, it should surprise absolutely no one that the tiny group at the top, the board of directors, takes an outsized portion of the net revenue and gives it to itself, to the major shareholders, to the top corporate executives, to the little mini king in the enterprise, the CEO, and so on. And that's the root of our inequality. So if you're concerned about our inequality, but you do not challenge the organization of the enterprise, well, to be blunt, you're not serious. You're not, in fact, concerned about the distribution. And the fact that you say so, which today is very popular in business circles, well, we're very concerned about the uneven distribution of the benefits of globalization or all that kind of thing. That's all blah, blah. That's all words. They're smart enough to recognize that they're in danger, but they have no grasp and no willingness to go where it would have to be taken if you're seriously going to do that. Which is why, by the way, even the steps Roosevelt took, the New Deal, the Social Security, and all the rest, none of it was able to endure. The last 50 years have been the systematic rollback of what the New Deal accomplished. That's why today, one fact summarizes it all. Over the last 15 months, 82 million Americans had to go file for unemployment compensation. They were unemployed either for a few weeks or for the entire 15 months. 82 million, however, suffered some period of unemployment when they would use up whatever savings they had been able to accumulate, become a burden and a strain on their families, on their neighborhoods, on their communities. The total labor force in this country is under 160 million. That means more than half of the labor force of the United States went through this kind of suffering. And as you noted, over the same 15 months, the 600 billionaires in this country increased their collective wealth just short of $1 trillion. I mean, you could not have a more grotesque story than having a pandemic that threatens us all be the occasion for an even more egregious inequality than we had going into it. So, yeah, Mr. Biden is not the man to take us even where Roosevelt went, and that wasn't far enough to deal with this problem either.